Good evening and welcome to Talking Sports with Evan. Friday edition of Talking Sports with Evan, and it's a Friday edition as I ended up being in Madison longer than I was originally anticipating yesterday. I was going to do a show yesterday, but I was in Madison for the WIAA State Football Championships. I was part of the broadcast team for Division 6, stuck around for Division 4. Didn't get home till about 1 in the morning. So I was going to do a show earlier today too, but I just needed some additional rest. So that's why it's a Friday night edition of Talking Sports with Evan, and have a lot to discuss today. Have a lot to talk about, a lot to go over. And I didn't even know where to start. We had Packer Bear week last week where the Packers ended up getting the victory over the Chicago Bears 2019 thanks to the tip of the finger of Carl Brooks, which was a great way to win the game at the all things considering. Gonna give my thoughts about that win, and then it's 49er week, another big rivalry for the Packers. The Packers and 49ers have played each other 73 times over the course of their both teams' existence, 10 postseason games. The Packers have won 38 games out of those 73. The 49ers have won 34 games, and they also have one tie. The Packers lead the series 38-34-1. However, the 49ers have beaten the Packers typically when it matters most, and that is the postseason. That is when the 49ers have beat the Packers, and I know this is a regular season game, but in reality, it's like a playoff game to the 49ers as they're coming in at 5-5, tied for second in their division, but basically last due to tiebreakers. And the Packers have an opportunity to kick a team while they're down. No Joey Bosa, no Brock Purdy. Trent Williams' availability is in question. So Packers have an opportunity to kick the 49ers while they're down and make things even more difficult for the 49ers to get to the playoffs in the first place. And I think that'd be a huge for the Packers to beat them in a playoff-like atmosphere, even with no Brock Purdy or no Bosa. The Packers are going to be without Edgerrin Cooper and Jair Alexander for sure, and then we'll see what the game time decisions happen in regards to inactives and whatnot, because we'll see who plays, who doesn't play, and whatnot. But outside of those two, at least it looks like the Packers are healthy. Outside of those two being out. Also going to talk some Milwaukee Brewers. Brewers got a award. A gentleman got an award this week. I'm going to talk about that. And the Badgers making moves on a Sunday for their coaching staff. The Badgers love making moves in the middle of or right around the end of Green Bay Packer games, apparently. 2022. Yep, 2022. Or was it 2023? Anyway, the Badgers make the decision to they make the decision to terminate Paul Chryst, and now this week they make the decision to fire their offensive coordinator and Phil Longo. And I'm going to give my thoughts on what I think the Badgers need to find for a new offensive coordinator. And then I have an expression I tend to use when I'm talking about NFL teams or even NBA teams, and just some teams, the same team, some teams always seem to be bad. And that is bad teams stay bad for a reason. And now we're seeing that with the New York Football Giants. Well, Daniel Jones in less than a week has gone from being benched to playing scout team safety to now being outright released by the Giants. And situations like that, situations in Jacksonville, situations in Chicago, situations in wherever, makes me grateful to be a Packer fan. The Packers are truly contenders pretty much year in and year out to make the playoffs, and then once you're in the playoffs, anything can happen. And yes, the Super Bowl is the ultimate goal. We want the Packers to win a Super Bowl. That's what we want. But my thing is you can't make the playoffs. You can't make the Super Bowl unless you make the playoffs. And that's what the Packers need to focus on first. Yes, I know we're tired of making the playoffs and coming up short, but at the end of the day, that's what matters. You have to make the playoffs first. And I would rather make the playoffs and be competitive year in and year out and be a well-run organization from top to bottom to be a dysfunctional team that we see around the league pretty consistently, in my opinion. So, I'm going to start with the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears. The Packers beat the Bears 20-19, like I said, and it was a much closer game than we all anticipated. The Bears were extremely dysfunctional. The Bears were extremely down on their luck. They just made a coordinator change, firing their offensive coordinator, who they literally just hired a few months ago, then to give it to Thomas Brown. And you had looked like a mutiny happening in Chicago, allegedly as well. So it basically looked like the Bears had completely bottomed out, and the Packers are going to have an opportunity to, as I mentioned before about the 49ers, it looked like they're going to have an opportunity to kick a team while they're down. But here's the thing. When you have the nonstop chaos going around all week long, don't be surprised especially when you make a coordinator change, if things don't go to plan, because ultimately you didn't know the offensive philosophy the Bears would be running with Thomas Brown running the offense. You really had no film on him on what he was going to be doing. And like I said, you didn't really have any film on what Thomas Brown was going to be doing except what he did in Carolina last year as the interim offensive coordinator. But you don't know exactly what he was going to do with Caleb Williams. And I thought he had a game plan that perfectly ran what you need to run with Caleb Williams. Allow him to just use his legs. If your initial read isn't there, just use your legs. He's a young quarterback, talented, athletic, and I think he was hanging around in the pocket too long going into this Packer game. And Thomas Brown's opinion in that game was like, hey, Caleb, be you. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget what got you here to the National Football League. It was your athleticism and it was your throwing arm. Athleticism first, throwing ability second. So don't forget what got you here and be you. And they ran a game plan that fit what Caleb Williams is. And it was just, to me, a perfectly executed game plan overall by the Bears offense that kept the Packers off balance. And they ended up getting the win after a blocked field goal where Carl Brooks was able to get a fingertip on the ball. And the NFL came out earlier today that said that there was no infractions on that block. So Bears head coach Eberflus, you can go cry yourself a river, because guess what? The NFL said there was no penalty there, and there wasn't. Eberflus was being annoying and crying about it and grasping for straws because Eberflus knows his job's in jeopardy and he's not happy when he loses, and he thought that he got robbed, which he didn't, and now he knows that, hey, there's nothing wrong with what we saw in this game. Obviously, we want the Packers to win more efficiently. We want a easy game where our blood pressure is not going to go through the roof. But unfortunately, that's not really who the Packers are right now. They have a defensive system they're still learning. They have a offense that looks to be getting their feet under them, and the Bears didn't really stop the Packers offense the entire day. The Packers stopped themselves. Interception in the red zone, a fourth down stop in the red zone. Jordan Love, 261 yards on 13 of 17. Very good day overall for Jordan Love, aside from the interception. Josh Jacobs, 18 carries for 76 yards and a touchdown. Very efficient running. Christian Watson, 4 for 150. Josh Jacobs, 4 for 58. Jaden Reed, 2 for 23. Romeo Doubs, 1 for 17. And Chris Brooks, 2 for 13. Offensively, the Packers, they moved the ball on the Bears pretty easily, in my opinion. The Bears won the total yards matchup, 391 to 366. It wasn't like the Packers were just dominated. The Bears didn't dominate the Packers. What beat the Packers was they were 1 for 5 on third downs, 0 for 1 on fourth downs, and they had an interception in the red zone. And that's really the only thing that stopped the Packers. It wasn't the Bears doing. The Packers only punted the ball once. The Bears punted the ball twice. And yet we only had a 20-19 game. So offensively, I'm not really worried about Green Bay after this Bear game. Defensively, do have some concerns. Rashawn Gary continues. I know he had a sack and 5 pressures, but he continues to not be consistent enough, in my opinion. Lucas Van Ness continues to be in a epic sophomore slump. Kenny Clark might as well have stayed in Green Bay last week. He would have had the exact same performance that he had Sunday if he would have just stayed in Green Bay instead of making the trip to Chicago. And then the linebacking core leaves a lot to be desired overall, too. But Packers, and then, you don't have Jair Alexander. He left the game after his knee wasn't quite right, and it turns out that he has a torn PCL, so he'll likely miss a couple weeks. So defensively, I have more concerns than I do with the offense. Jordan Love is, I think, going to have a huge second half of the year as now he's finally healthy. You watch his mechanics, you watch him throw the ball compared to earlier in the year, and then this game against the Bears. And it looked night and day different. He was under center. He was moving around better. He was able to take off and run. And what should have been a touchdown, but they ruled him down at the 1. That was a heck of an effort by Jordan Love to try to get that ball into the end zone. So I'm not overly worried about the Packers and the Bears' performance overall. At the end of the day, winning in the National Football League is hard. And never apologize for a win. You can win by 1. You can win by 50. My opinion is you never apologize for a win. You never take wins for granted, because the NFL, to me, and I've said this often over the last, basically since I started doing podcasting, the NFL is a week-to-week league. Don't get too high on things that happened in week 8. Don't get too high on things that happen in week 12. The NFL is a week-to-week league where things that happened in a week ago may not be relevant in now. The Lions were in a dogfight against the Texans and should have lost against the Texans, where Jared Goff threw 5 interceptions, and then the Lions go out and just completely annihilate their opponent last week, Jaguars, another team that's in a hot mess. So, like I said, the NFL is very week to week, and outside of Detroit and Kansas City's not really dominated. There's not really any teams in the NFL that you can point to and say they're guaranteed to go to the Super Bowl. I think the Lions have their flaws. I think the Chiefs have their flaws. The Bills have their flaws. The Packers have their flaws. The Texans have their flaws. Every team, the Ravens have their flaws. This is like probably the first time in a number of years I can't just say, hey, this team's for sure going to the Super Bowl. I think the Lions at this time are the most likely to get there, but until the Lions get there, I never believe in Detroit just because Detroit's going to eventually Detroit. Campbell's aggressive coaching strategy is going to end up biting him in the you-know-what, and he's going to cost the Lions a game at the worst possible moment like he did against San Francisco in the NFC Championship game back in January. That's what's ultimately going to happen to Detroit, and that's my opinion on Detroit until I'm proven wrong. Win something, and then I will stop assuming you're going to eventually pull a Detroit. So this week, Packers play the 49ers, the nemesis of the Packers, and they've knocked the Packers out of the playoffs in 2012. They knocked the Packers out of the playoffs in 2013. They knocked the Packers out of the playoffs in 2019. They knocked the Packers out of the playoffs in 2022. And they knocked the Packers out of the playoffs in 2024. The 49ers are definitely a rivalry. They're definitely a nemesis to the Green Bay Packers, and it's going to be another matchup between these two teams, but it's going to look a little different than we've originally thought because we're not going to have Brock Purdy. We're not going to have Nick Bosa. We may not have Trent Williams. We know we're not going to have Ayuk. And for the Packers side, we know we're not going to have Jair, and we know we're not going to have Edgerrin Cooper, who unfortunately had a hamstring injury in practice, I think, yesterday. But you look at the 49ers, they got Christian McCaffrey back, and we shouldn't just assume the Packers are going to go into, it's in Green Bay, are going to play the 49ers and just wipe the floor with them. We shouldn't just assume that because we still have Christian McCaffrey in San Francisco. And one of those playoff games that I talked about that the 49ers knocked the Packers out of the playoffs back in 2019, the NFC Championship game, Jimmy Garoppolo threw 8 passes the entire game, and the 49ers still completely annihilated Green Bay. So we can't take anything for granted. Well, we do know 49ers will be starting Brandon Allen. Brandon Allen, for those that don't know, was drafted by Jacksonville back in 2016. He has not taken a snap this season for the 49ers, and career, he has played in Denver, Cincinnati, and San Francisco, and he has 1,600 yards passing for his career, 10 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. His best year was 2020. We had 925 yards passing, 5 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. But with the 49ers, it's more about the scheme than it is the guy playing quarterback. As I said, the 49ers back in 2019 beat the Packers throwing the ball 8 times the entire game. They relied on the running game, and we saw what the Bears did a week ago against Green Bay. We saw what the Eagles did in week 1 against Green Bay. We saw what Jonathan Taylor did before he didn't play at all in the fourth quarter against Green Bay. Shanahan's game plan is going to be simple. We're going to use Christian McCaffrey. We're going to use Jordan Mason. We're going to use Isaac Guerendo to try to wear out this Packer defense, which is going to be without a corner and a linebacker. And we have linebackers that tend to struggle stopping the run, defensive line that tends to struggle stopping the run. That's how Mike Shanahan is going to try to beat Green Bay. McCaffrey has 118 yards on 32 attempts in his first couple games back. And the 49ers tend to spread the ball out offensively. Jawan Jennings has 42 catches on 58 targets. George Kittle, 43 catches on 53 targets. Debo, 33 catches on 52 targets. and they spread the ball around between those guys. George Kittle with 7 touchdowns, Jennings with 4. The big thing the Packers need to do is figure out how to stop Debo and Kittle and not let one of the other receivers for San Francisco, like a Joanne Jennings, end up taking over the game offensively if you focus too much on them. Defensively for San Francisco, Floyd is an issue with he has 4.5 sacks. They're going to miss Bosa's 7, but Leonard Floyd has 4.5. Malik Collins has 4. Kevin Givens has 3.5. The 49ers can get after the quarterback, and they're going to have to protect Jordan Love if they want to move the football. And they still have a very good linebacker in Fred Warner. Now, Devondre Campbell has not played very well against the pass, so hopefully we can get some Tucker Kraft big catch and runs if we can get coverage with him on Campbell. But this 49er defense is still pretty good, and they're still a team to watch, and they're going to come ready to play, well prepared, well coached, ready to play 60 minutes of football. And the Packers cannot just go in to this game against San Francisco knowing that there's no Brock Purdy, no Nick Bosa, and assume they're going to get the victory. Packers need to come in prepared, ready to go, and get to work. And like I said, not just assume they have the win. We saw the Packers come out flat against Jacksonville, who the Packers are significantly better than. We saw the Packers struggle at times against the Bears, another team the Packers are better than. And we've seen the Packers have problems coming out flat at times. And we can't afford that. We need to come out prepared, ready to go. And hopefully we had a good week. Hopefully, say we like I play for the team. Hopefully LaFleur had a good week of practice. The team had a good week of practice. And hopefully that's what we end up seeing in Green Bay this week. So I think the Packers get the victory. I think the Packers lean heavily on Josh Jacobs, which they should again. And I think they're able to beat San Francisco 34-13. I think the 49ers are going to have a hard time getting that offense going with a backup quarterback that doesn't move very well. That's kind of a sitting duck in the pocket. And I think he's going to make some mistakes and throw some interceptions. And I think, as I said, the Packers get probably their most convincing win of the season. I saw this on X or Twitter earlier today, and I kind of agree with it a little bit. So back in 1996, the Cowboys, a shell of themselves, comes to Lambeau Field, and the Packers 97. 96, they lost in Dallas, ended up winning the Super Bowl. 97, the Cowboys come to Green Bay, a shell of themselves, and the Packers knocked them around a little bit. They kind of got that monkey off their back. This is a time for the Packers to do the same to San Francisco. An easy way to not have to see the 49ers in the playoffs again is simple. Beat them on Sunday. You look at this division, the NFC West, you have the Cardinals at 6-4. Then you got the Rams at 5-5, the Seahawks at 5-5, the 49ers at 5-5, and the 49ers, I believe, are just 1-2 in the division, maybe 1-3. They've not been playing very well in their division, and this is an opportunity to kick the 49ers while they're down and hopefully, possibly keep them from making the playoffs. So that's my thought on the Packers and the 49ers. NFL-wise, going to go on a little bit of a tangent, a little bit of a rant here. I have a saying. And I think I've been saying this now for about 5 or 6 years. Bad teams stay bad for a reason. And typically it's poor leadership at the top. The Lions finally figured it out. They finally stopped trying to be something else, and they decided to take the time and build their own culture instead of trying to be the Patriots, instead of trying to be the Colts. They're like, and I say that because of Caldwell experience there. They're finally, it's time to build up who we want to be, and it's worked really well because the owner hired the right president, who hired the right GM, who hired the right head coach. You look at Green Bay, the Packers hired Bob Harlan to be the team president, and that was a turning point in the Packer organization because from the final Super Bowl win of the Lombardi era until 92, Packers weren't very good. And they kind of ran in that same situation of bad teams stay bad for a reason, and it's because they kept hiring the wrong head coaches, and things just kind of trickled down from there. Well, then Bob Harlan hires Ron Wolf, who hires Mike Holmgren. Ron Wolf traded a first-round draft pick for Brett Favre. He signed Reggie White, and he built the team into the contenders that we saw during the 90s and the early 2000s. Bob Harlan saw Mike Sherman was in over his head as a general manager, made a change quickly there, and then that general manager made a change at the head coach. So the Packers organization has been very good since 1992. Yes, I'm deliberately leaving out the 60s and the 50s intentionally because the Packers from the end of the Lombardi era to 92 were making every decision wrong, pretty much. And it all started with their leadership at the top. Detroit, very bad until now because of similar situations. The owner kept hiring the wrong president and GMs and the wrong coaches and just couldn't never figure out what they wanted to be until recently. The New York Giants are another example of that. The New York Jets are an example of that. The Jacksonville Jaguars are an example of that. The Chicago Bears are an example of that. The Carolina Panthers, the New Orleans Saints, examples of teams that are bad for a reason. The Las Vegas Raiders, the Tennessee Titans. They looked like they were starting to build something there, but then they let Mark Vrabel go for really no reason. But the main team I want to focus on right now is the New York Football Giants. And the reason why I want to focus on them is they just made a decision today. They decided they were going to release Daniel Jones. They're releasing him now, and they benched him originally for the same reason why the Broncos benched Russell Wilson last year is because if he gets injured between now and the end of the league year, his money next year becomes guaranteed. And the Giants are trying to avoid making that money guaranteed. Well, now they just totally officially made it impossible to make it guaranteed because they just released him. So they benched him on Monday. I think it was Monday. They had him play scout team safety, which is very dumb if you're trying to avoid your wrongly highly paid quarterback a lot of money. Why are you having him play scout team safety? That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever in any avenue because now you're risking him getting injured. Heck, if he would have dropped a weight on his foot in the weight room and the team headquarters, that money's guaranteed. But now they're having him play safety. Absolutely stupid, absolutely ridiculous. And then they ultimately released him today after Daniel Jones gave it had to have been a written statement. It seemed very scripted to me. But Daniel Jones gives a statement yesterday or the day before, basically saying his goodbyes, and then the Giants just outright released him today. The Giants are a disaster of an organization. The New York Giants are a disaster, and they've been a disaster pretty much the last time they won the Super Bowl. Brian Darboh has not been a good head coach. He had a really good first year, which ended up getting Daniel Jones paid. The GM, Sheehan, has not been very good. He's missed on draft picks after missed on draft picks after missed on draft picks. And John Mara has not been a good owner. And it starts with John Mara, and everything just trickles down from there. Bad teams stay bad for a reason. They got crappy leadership at the top, and they hire the wrong people. A couple years back, so the Giants decided they were not going to exercise Daniel Jones' fifth-year option as a first-round pick. He then leads them to the playoffs. Now you're stuck in a tough situation here. Do you pay Daniel Jones? Do you franchise tag Daniel Jones? Or do you make the tough decision to start over at the quarterback position a year after he got you into the playoffs? The New York Giants also had another tough situation on their hand. Saquon Barkley, their top 5 pick, the most popular player on the team, is set to be a free agent at the same time as Daniel Jones. So the New York Giants overthought it, made the wrong decision. They franchise tagged Barkley, and they gave Daniel Jones an extension. That's what the Giants decided to do. Barkley, pissed off, angry that they franchise tagged him instead of negotiating a long-term deal with him, he left, and now you're stuck with Daniel Jones until they released him today. You paid Daniel Jones a crap ton of money to be a mediocre to below average starting quarterback. What you should have done, franchise tag Daniel Jones and give him an opportunity to show if he could put together. And the year that the Giants made the playoffs, he didn't even have that good of a season. He did just good enough. He did just good enough to get them into the playoffs, and they got a playoff win. The Giants should have went with you franchise tag him, and then you see if he could have a strong year, and if he doesn't, he's gone. And if he does, you try to negotiate a long-term deal and potentially franchise tag him again. Personally, I would have just let him go altogether. Thank you, Daniel Jones, for 4 years of mediocre football. Thank you, Daniel Jones, for 4 years of bad football. Thank you, Daniel Jones, for a playoff victory in a season where you didn't play very well to begin with. But we're going to move on. That is what the Giants should have done, but they didn't. And the Giants are a bad team for a reason. The Giants stayed bad for a reason, and that's why they're going to probably need a new head coach again next year. They're probably going to need a new general manager next year. And you could look at the same teams of Jacksonville and Carolina and the Raiders, and you see the same problems they make over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. So that's my thought on the New York Football Giants and just the complete mess that organization has become. And finally, congratulations to Pat Murphy Pat Murphy is manager of the year. Craig Counsell finished second numerous times during his tenure in Milwaukee, and Pat Murphy's first year in Milwaukee as manager, he wins manager of the year. So applaud to Pat Murphy. Well deserved. He came in a team that looked like they weren't going to compete at all, won the division, and made the playoffs. And I get we want to take that next step, but the Brewers took one of the youngest teams in baseball, won the division, and made the playoffs. And now we're going to see what they can do in 2025. And it feels really strange saying, see what they can do in 2025. But that's what we are going to see next. And the hot stove is heating up, and I'm going to eventually get some people to talk hot stove with me. And the Brewers making some moves today. They tendered contracts to William Contreras, to Aaron Savelli, to Nick Mears, to Trevor McGill, to Joel Payampas, to Devin Williams, and they non-tendered Hobie Milner. They also signed backup catcher to a one-year deal as well. So the Brewers are starting to make their moves. So I'm going to stop it there. Going to be back with you next week with Talking Sports with Evan. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Podcast to be posted very soon to anywhere you can get your podcasts. Again, this is Talking Sports with Evan, and I will talk to you next week, hopefully talking about another Green Bay Packer victory. Have a good rest of your night, everybody.